I brought my brewer colleague Sophie here today because, Sophie,
Hello.
I want to talk about non-alcoholic beers, and especially now at times we can actually have tasty non-alcoholic beers, and which is slightly different to what you used to be able to have. Sophie, how do you actually make a non-alcoholic beer? Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, of course. So you can either make a non-alcoholic beer by fermentation, or you can use mechanical techniques. So yeah, you can use a yeast that doesn't produce alcohol, or you can use other techniques. So that's how.
And we have some different beers here that we actually want to taste and we want to measure. So before we continue on, let's get something in the glass. Looks nice and brighted.
It does.
We can actually just
Let's measure it.
pop that on here. Cheers.
Cheers.
It's nice and fruity.
A lot of hops in the nose.
Compared to a lot of old styles of non-alcoholic beers, like it still has like a slight sweet flavor, but for
Not
me
a lot,
at least,
I think.
But for me at least, it's very down-toned to compare
Yes.
to what you could expect.
And it's very fruity and still a bit like lacking a bit of mouthfeel, maybe a bit thin, but actually quite decent, I think.
This is definitely something I could drink on a terrace during a summer day.
Yes, same for me.
So as it's running, some of the things that our customers will look at with non-alcoholic beers are of course alcohol and density, but maybe also looking a bit into the comparison between the two in regards to real degree of fermentation, where you can see how much of your beer has fermented, for example, with the method that Sophie talked about with fermentation techniques. So you can see, are you hitting the relative proportion between each time you brew a batch? And that's a pretty cool feature we have on here. So the next one we have up here is a New England IPA. It's a bit more hop forward in that way. So this is the style I really like. But while I pour this, Sophie, maybe you can talk a bit about why it's important to measure your non-alcoholic beers.
So one of the very important things to measure when you're producing a non-alcoholic beer is of course alcohol. So you want to make sure that your beer doesn't contain too much alcohol in order to follow legislation. So a lot of legislation is it can't be above 0.5% alcohol, and you need to make sure that you're below this. So this is one of the very important parameters to measure, and it's also interesting, as Nikolai said, to measure a real degree of fermentation if you are producing a non-alcoholic beer with fermentation. So you can follow the fermentation and figure out when the fermentation has come to an end.
Cheers.
Cheers. Very hop forward, this one.
Super fruity, almost like very minimal residual sugar. It's quite fermented, this one, actually.
It is, but it still has a bit of that wort flavor.
Definitely.
In it, like a bit grainy.
Definitely.
Bit of caramel. Yeah. But it has more mouthfeel, this one. And it also, it has some haze. And I really like that as well. Yeah.
Before we continue on to our last beer sample, which is a bit of an outlier compared to the other two, we can actually have a look at the data from the BeerFoss. And we can see a original extract, which is relatively low compared to a lot of other beers, around 5. And we have a real extract, the ending sugar value basically of 4.5. And alcohol is 0.48 here. So we are below legislation, which is cool.
And on the can it also says 0.5, so yeah, it's spot on.
From a real degree of fermentation point of view, we have 14.6. So it's a relatively non-fermented beer. And I don't know what you think, but this could be a fermentation product. I don't know how they actually produce, but
I would expect it to be. Yeah, I think the ones that are not fermented tastes a bit different, like a bit maybe more cooked. in a way because you remove the alcohol with heat often. Yeah. So.
We have one more beer to go. This is going to be interesting. Have you tried non-alcoholic stouts before? Oy.
I have tried one. I have tried a dry stout, non-alcoholic. I can't remember who made it, but it was a bit thin, I would say. It definitely lacked some mouth feel, but it is super difficult to incorporate. So yeah.
Let's see. Cheers.
Yes. Cheers. Interesting color.
For sure. Chocolate and cherries almost.
Yeah, and vanilla.
Vanilla.
Yeah. Like a cake.
Definitely tastes a lot like cake.
Wow.
That's for sure.
It's very sweet.
That's very, very sweet.
But it also has some of the roastiness from the malts, and I really like that. It kind of complements the sweetness in a nice way, but for me this is too sweet.
I think it's a good take on a non-alcoholic stout.
Yes?
It is a very hard style to hit though, because you kind
It
of
is.
lack the body of the alcohol.
Yeah, but what do you think about the body in this one?
It definitely has like the sweetness is so huge, so it definitely has a lot of that. But there's definitely something lacking, like there's a booziness lacking that I usually associate a bit with this kind of pastry stout style that we are looking at here.
Yeah.
As we talked about, original extract is usually fun to look at, just to see does it actually correspond with where I was beforehand. And maybe with this kind of beer, calories might be important, but that's some of the stuff that you definitely could look at with our small instrument here.